After days of hot debate, the Senate is finally getting set to vote on taking your taxpayer dollars away from an organization called Planned Parenthood. And that could cost that group more than $500 million a year.
The Senate vote comes after a third undercover video showing Planned Parenthood doctors arranging the sale of the body parts of unborn babies. David Brody brings us the story from Washington.
The video is hard to watch. Planned Parenthood doctors discussing how much aborted baby body parts would sell for on the fetal tissue market.
There was like 3 or 4 samples we could have taken out of the 11.6, so that would be, if we were doing like, 50 to 75 per specimen, that would be like 200, 300, right? And we'd be comfortable with that.
While Planned Parenthood claims it does not sell fetal tissue for profit, Republican lawmakers have seen enough. And they're calling for the federal funding of Planned Parenthood to stop immediately.
Our legislation ensures that federal funding taken from Planned Parenthood will be made available to other entities that provide health services for women.
Senator Rand Paul is one of the leaders in this fight, and for him, this issue goes back a long time.
Where does this come from for you? Why is this a heart issue for you? It's something you've been talking about for a while now.
Probably my very first public speech, I spoke out against abortion. I gave a speech in my church when I was 17 years old. My hands were shaking. It was the first time I ever spoke in public, really, but it was because I felt strongly that we should make a statement on this, and that really all the rest of our rights, everything else that I argue for, all stems from the right to life. And if you don't defend the right to life, really, how can you be for any other sort of lesser rights or secondary rights?
While Republicans like Paul are taking action, Democrats refuse to rush to judgment. Presidential candidate Hillary Clinton calls the video, quote, disturbing, yet defends the controversial organization.
For more than a century, Planned Parenthood has provided essential services for women. And I think it is unfortunate that Planned Parenthood has been the object of such a concerted attack for so many years.
Senator Paul, who's also running for president, says Clinton is on the wrong side of this debate.
What do you make of her comments, and where does this put her in the debate?
She's also taking money from Planned Parenthood. She's taken at least $10,000 that we can find in contributions from Planned Parenthood officials, and I've called for her to return that. I think she should send the money back. I think the money is tainted. I think the money comes from, indirectly at least, from people who are selling babies' organs.
Presidential politics aside, this is now a numbers game. Senate Republicans need 60 votes to push this bill through, which means some Democrats are going to have to join them, and that's an uphill battle for sure. And speaking of numbers, the lack of attention to the videos from the mainstream media coverage hasn't helped. A new Media Research Center report shows that the big 3 networks spent just 11 minutes on this story in the last 2 weeks. Compare that to the 14 minutes spent in just 1 day by the networks on Cecile, the famous African lion, shot to death by an American dentist. It's just another hurdle to overcome in a fight that is passionate on both sides. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, David. They've got to vote on that thing, and I know you'd like to have your voice heard, so the best place to let it be heard is in the halls of Congress. So we've got a number. It's right there on your screen, 202-224-3121. That's the Capitol Hill switchboard. You can ask for your senator, whoever your senator happens to be from your state. Let's give you that number one more time. Get on the phones and say, I think we should defund Planned Parenthood. 202-224-3121. That's the Capitol Hill switchboard, and just ask for your senator. If the lines are busy, keep calling. And I think it's time. I mean, $530 million a year of your money are going to pay for that abortion provider. And for Hillary Clinton to say, well, for decades, Planned Parenthood has been at the forefront of women's health. It was started by Margaret Sanger, and all she wanted to do was eugenics. I read a monograph that she wrote called Breeding the Thoroughbred. And the whole idea is you sterilize black people, you sterilize Southern Europeans, you sterilize white Protestants, you sterilize those who are mentally defective. That was the game of Planned Parenthood, and to say that it's some noble organization is just pure hogwash. So call again. Let me give you that number again. Keep those phones ringing. Tell the senators what you want. Let them hear your voice. And if you think we should continue to dole out $500 million a year to Planned Parenthood, will be my guest. That's the number, 202-224-3121. Well, in other news, what happened to that Malaysian airliner that vanished without a trace last year? Now investigators think they may finally have a solid piece of evidence. Wendy Griffith has that story from our CBN newsroom. Here's Wendy.
Pat, that possible clue washed ashore on an island in the Indian Ocean. Investigators say the piece of debris could be a major lead in the disappearance of flight MH370 last year. George Thomas has the story.
Investigators are almost certain that the 9-foot chunk of debris is part of a wing that's unique to the Boeing 777 aircraft.
This piece of wreckage is what's called a flaperon. It's used when you're slowing the aircraft down and for takeoff.
Today, the only missing Boeing 777 in the world is the Malaysia Airlines plane that disappeared last year.
Clearly, if this is wreckage from MH370, it's an important breakthrough.
The piece of debris, which was covered in shells, was found on the island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar.
Investigators say if that piece is indeed from the missing airliner, it means it traveled some 4,000 miles away from the plane's last location.
It seems unusual that it would be on the other side of the Indian Ocean, except when you look at the Indian Ocean current, which is anti-clockwise. And oceanographers always said that the debris, if we found any, would be southern Indonesia or on the east coast of Africa or one of the islands.
Officials are now focusing on a number stamped on the wreckage.
In aviation, every single part of an aeroplane, all the millions of pieces, have a serial number. You can track it back to the day it was manufactured.
Aviation experts say Boeing will be able to identify the source of the debris within 24 hours.
As long as the part number and the serial number can still be read, that's the big thing, because that'll help us understand if it's come from this aircraft or not.
On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing when it vanished with 239 people. It prompted a massive multi-country search that came up empty. Now, 17 months later, the first real physical evidence that could help investigators finally begin to solve the mystery of MH370.
It would not surprise me if more debris will be washing up in that part of the region in the coming weeks.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. Well, with 1 week to go before the first Republican presidential debate, a new poll shows Donald Trump with a commanding lead in the GOP field. Trump is now in first place with 25% in the Reuters Ipsos poll, with Jeb Bush in second place with 12%. And still, another Republican has announced he'll run for president, former Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore. He is the 17th candidate to get into the race. Senate Republicans are still looking for answers in the IRS targeting scandal. At a hearing Wednesday, Senator Ted Cruz asked Commissioner John Koskinen why the IRS would demand that an Iowa pro-life group tell them about the content of their prayers. Koskinen admitted that was, quote, totally inappropriate and said he has apologized for the IRS. The agency also made every member of that Iowa group promise not to picket Planned Parenthood. Overall, the IRS targeted dozens of Tea Party and conservative groups holding up their tax-exempt status before the 2010 and 2012 elections. Jay Sekulow of the American Center for Law and Justice told the committee the IRS still hasn't acted in some cases.
I represent 38 groups that were targeted by the Internal Revenue Service. That targeting, by the way, has not resulted in an end of all the cases. I've got 2 clients, one of which is waiting now for 6 years for a determination from the Internal Revenue Service.
And a federal judge is threatening to hold Koskinen in contempt because the agency has not turned over email from former IRS official Lois Lerner. Pat, this is one of those stories I just can't believe I'm reading.
Well, there was one commentator that said the truth is this is the way the Chicago crime syndicate worked. They took over the government and then they did whatever they wanted to do. And I think that's where Obama got his lessons. He's thumbed his noses at Congress. He's thumbed his nose at any courts. He's thumbed his nose at anybody that came along that stood in his way. He's like a dictator. He thinks that he rules supreme, and I think that federal judge, I believe his name is Sullivan, he's a tough guy. And I think it's absolutely appropriate to put Lois Lerner in jail until she comes forward with what she's supposed to. And I think by jailing their lawyer and jailing Koskinen, why not? Because if the IRS comes after you folks, Mr. and Mrs. Ordinary Citizen, and they say that we want your records, and you say, well, I've lost them. Well, tough luck. We're going to hit you with a fine. We'll double it. We'll, you know, put a 25% penalty on each month compounded. And before long, we'll dig a hole so deep you'll never get out of it. And if you don't like that, we'll garnish your bank account, or we'll put a lien on your assets, and we'll break you. That happens all the time. The IRS has enormous power. And to think that internally the IRS is as corrupt as it is shown to be is a horrifying thing. We do need tax revenue in our country, but we need it collected honestly from people who observe the law, do not feel they're above the law.